Cleo Raines had 3 rules about powerful men. Don't look at them directly, don't speak unless spoken to, and above all, never correct them in public. She broke all 3 before her coffee got cold. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early March, and Harlow's diner was running at full capacity. Every booth taken, the lunch counter packed 3 deep, a line of 4 people waiting near the door. Cleo wasn't supposed to be working the floor. She was the diner's bookkeeper, her office wedged into a converted storage room behind the kitchen, and she only came out when she needed to refill her mug. The coffee in her back room had run dry at exactly the wrong moment. She was pouring at the counter when the front door opened and 5 men walked in the way. Certain men always walked into rooms, as if the space had been waiting for them specifically. 4 of the 5 were large in a way that suggested professional violence. The 5th was something else entirely. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark-suited, with a kind of stillness that most men had to spend years practicing, and he appeared to have simply been born with. He didn't look around the room so much as he catalogued it. One slow, economical sweep that probably registered every exit and every face before he finished stepping through the door. Cleo noticed 2 things immediately. First, he was unreasonably good-looking, in a way that made her instinctively subtract points just to feel safe. Second, he had absolutely no intention of waiting. One of his men moved toward a corner booth, a family of 4, halfway through their plates, and said something too low for Cleo to catch. Whatever it was, the mother started gathering her children's coats. Cleo set down her coffee mug. She walked around the counter and planted herself between the man and the family, before she'd fully made the decision to do it. "These people are eating," she said. The man who'd spoken to the family turned to look at her. He wore the specific blank expression of someone who hadn't been challenged by a woman in a cardigan in quite some time. "Mr. Aldgate needs a table." Cleo glanced at the family. The mother had stopped gathering coats. The father was watching her with an expression caught somewhere between relief and terror. "There's a wait," Cleo said. 20 minutes, maybe 30. There's a list by the door." Silence. She felt the particular weight of being fully looked at by someone dangerous, and she stood still inside it, because the family was still sitting there, and she'd already opened her mouth. The man by the door, the one with the stillness, the one who was apparently Aldgate, turned his gaze on her. It wasn't threatening, it was simply complete. "I have a meeting," he said. His voice was quieter than she'd expected. "So does Mr. Chen, and he's been waiting 11 minutes. She gestured toward a man in a grey suit near the window, who immediately looked as though he would have preferred not to be mentioned by name. Something shifted in Aldgate's expression. Not anger, more like recalibration. One of his men moved toward the family again. Cleo didn't step back. "If anyone touches those plates, I'll have the health inspector here before anyone sits down." She had no idea if that was a real threat. Apparently it didn't matter, because 2 of the men actually stopped moving. Aldgate looked at his men, then he said quietly, "Outside." He turned to follow them. Cleo's heart was somewhere in the vicinity of her throat. Then she made her second mistake. She'd been half-listening the way bookkeepers always half-listened. To numbers, to patterns, to the gap between what people said and what the figures actually showed. One of Aldgate's men, stepping past her toward the door, had been on the phone. She'd caught 3 numbers and a quarterly date, and those 3 numbers sat wrong in her head, the way a misplaced decimal always sat wrong. "That figure's off," she said, to no one in particular, "by about 60,000. Every person in earshot went still. Aldgate turned back around. Cleo realized, approximately 1 second too late, that she had said that out loud. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Excuse me?" She'd already committed. "The number your man just said. If that's a quarterly projection for the Mariner properties on 8th, It's 60,000 and short of what those units should be generating based on last year's assessed values. She paused. I file the property tax documentation for the building next door. I pay attention to the numbers on this block. Nobody breathed. Aldgate walked back toward her. He stopped 2 feet away, which was closer than anyone who'd just been lectured about booth etiquette. Probably should have stood. Are you certain? He asked. About the 60,000, yes. She hesitated. About the health inspector threat, less so. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the exact shape of where one might eventually appear. What's your name? Cleo Rains. I do the books here, and for 3 other businesses on this block. She didn't know why she said the second part. Nerves, probably. He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he left. The family of 4 exhaled as one. Cleo walked back to her office and stared at her screen for 20 minutes without seeing any of it. The next morning she arrived at 8, started the coffee, and was pulling up her first file when the bell over the door rang at 8:47. Theron Aldgate walked in alone. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just the dark suit and the stillness, and a manila envelope tucked under one arm. Cleo stared at him. We open at 9. The door was unlocked. She looked at the door. The door was in fact unlocked. She'd propped it open to air out the back room. This was entirely her own fault. I have a client call at 9:15, she said. This won't take long. He set the envelope on her desk. I need someone to verify the numbers connected to the Mariner properties, given that you apparently already know what they should be. Cleo looked at the envelope, then at him. My consultation rate is $75 an hour. He placed 2 folded bills on the desk without discussion. For 2 hours. She opened the envelope. It took her 40 minutes. When she finished, she turned her chair around. He had been waiting with the same quality of stillness he apparently carried into every room. Your projected revenue models are accurate, she said. But there's a variance in the disbursement records. Someone has been rerouting small amounts across separate accounts at irregular intervals. The pattern's been running for at least 18 months. Whoever it is knows exactly how audits work and was counting on nobody reviewing the quarters side by side. She paused. I reviewed the quarters side by side. Aldgate picked up the papers. He studied the 3 lines she'd marked. His expression went very quiet, in a way that made her grateful the problem wasn't hers to inherit. What do I owe you for the second hour? You paid for 2. I only used 40 minutes. She pushed the extra bill back. He pushed it back. Keep it. Then he was gone, and Cleo sat in her office for a while, thinking about the specific way he'd said, "You'll hear from me," and whether that was something to look forward to, or something to be cautious about. She landed, somewhat against her better judgment, on both. 3 days later he returned with another envelope. Different properties, different logs, same underlying problem, rerouted through a different structure. Cleo found it in under an hour. He paid. He left. The following week he arrived with a set of books that, as far as she could determine, were entirely in order. She went through every line twice. Everything balances. I know. She looked up. Then why am I looking at it? Aldgate's expression didn't shift. Professional verification. Cleo pulled a sticky note from her drawer and wrote, Consultation. Won her $75. She slid it across the desk. He paid in exact change. She heard something from the direction of the diner that might have been one of his men, disguising a laugh as a cough. After that, the visit settled into a pattern. Not constant, twice a week at most, sometimes once, sometimes less. Some documents had genuine problems. A partnership review for 3 hotel properties turned up $200,000 in misdirected funds that his entire finance team had somehow walked past, and it took Cleo 2 full sessions to map the trail. Those sessions she didn't mind. Some documents had no problems at all, and she charged $75 and he paid, and neither of them said the obvious thing. What Cleo began noticing, slowly, was everything surrounding the paperwork. He remembered things. She'd mentioned once, offhandedly, that a software vendor had been overcharging her for a tier she didn't use. 3 weeks later, he mentioned a contact at the company who could sort it out. He didn't frame it as a favor. He mentioned it, the way he'd mention any outstanding item that needed to be closed. He waited. Every time she was with another client, Theron Aldgate sat at the two-top near the diner window and drank his coffee and did not check his watch. Cleo knew this because she kept accidentally checking. He didn't pretend the envelope was urgent when it wasn't. He didn't act like she was doing him a favor when she was, in fact, doing her job. She had started looking at the door when the bell rang. Eli Bancroft had been coming to Harlow's for 2 years. He was 36, an architect with a firm across the street, and he brought Cleo an oat milk latte every Thursday because he'd learned her order 8 months ago and simply kept doing it. He was kind and easy and had an uncomplicated smile and absolutely no one watching him from across the room whenever he walked in. On a Thursday in May, he set the latte on her desk and leaned in the doorway. New exhibit at the Architecture Museum Friday night. Open bar. People worth talking to. You'd probably hate the interpretive section, but you'd enjoy having opinions about it. Cleo laughed. At that precise moment, Theron Aldgate arrived, with an envelope he had not mentioned the day before. He looked at Eli. Eli looked at him. Recognition crossed Eli's face in the careful way it crossed most faces around this particular man. "I can come back," Aldgate said to Cleo. "I have 15 minutes before my 1 o'clock." She gestured to the chair. Eli was just leaving. Eli was not in fact leaving, but he could read a room. He picked up his coffee and went. Aldgate sat down, a pause. "How long has he been coming here?" Cleo blinked. "He's a friend." "How long?" She gave him a slow look. "Do you need that information for any professional purpose?" Aldgate appeared to think about this. "No." "Then we should probably look at what's in the envelope." There was nothing wrong with what was in the envelope. He paid $75 in exact change again. The following Thursday, Eli brought a second latte with a small card that said Friday, in clean architect's handwriting. The Thursday after that, Theron Aldgate arrived first. He set a paper bag on her desk before she could speak. Inside was a lemon poppy seed muffin, still warm, from a bakery across the city that Cleo had mentioned exactly once, in passing 6 weeks ago. The coffee had a logo she didn't recognize. She checked the receipt stapled to the bag. "This coffee is $19. "I know. Ellie's coffee costs $4.50. "I'm aware." Cleo looked at him for a long moment. "Are you competing with a $4.50 latte?" A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "No, I'm winning." The laugh that came out of her was sudden and real, and she had to put the muffin down. Theron Aldgate went completely still. Cleo had been careful, inside her own head, about what she called what was happening between them. That laugh clarified several things at once. He was jealous of an oat milk latte brought by a perfectly decent architect, and she found that, inconveniently, immediately, entirely endearing. The Regional Business Development Gala was the first event Cleo had ever attended under her own name. 3 businesses she'd untangled over the past year had mentioned her publicly, and the invitation had arrived, addressed to her practice, not to anyone she worked for. She arrived as Cleo Rains, sole proprietor of Rains Financial Services. For the first 40 minutes, she was exactly that. Then Marguerite Holloway introduced her to a cluster of investors near the bar. Marguerite was a financial advisor who worked with several of Theron's legitimate holdings. Precise, polished, and possessed of the particular warmth that required constant maintenance. She smiled at Cleo and said, "This is Theron Aldgate's bookkeeper." "Cleo Rains," Cleo said. "I have my own practice." "Of course." The smile didn't change. "We've heard wonderful things." 20 minutes later, to a different group, Theron brought her in to manage his property accounts. Remarkable what access to the right client can do for a small practice. Cleo excused herself before she said something that couldn't be unsaid. By the third introduction, the woman Aldgate keeps on retainer. She had mapped exactly what Marguerite was doing. Nothing demonstrably false. Nothing you could object to without appearing oversensitive. Just 2 words, Aldgates and retainer, quietly folding 2 years of her own work inside someone else's name. She was still deciding how directly to address it when Marguerite turned to a larger group of venture partners and said lightly, "Actually, I understand there have been preliminary discussions about bringing Rains Financial under the Aldgate Group's umbrella." Such an exciting next step. The room turned. Cleo stopped breathing for a moment. She looked across the room and found Theron watching Marguerite, with a stillness she'd learned to read. But Cleo spoke first. "Did you authorize that?" The question landed in silence. She was looking directly at him. "No," 1 word, immediate. Cleo turned back to Marguerite. "My name is Cleo Rains." Her voice stayed level. "I built my practice 1 client at a time over 2 years, and I am not affiliated with, employed by, or sponsored by Aldgate Group or any organization connected to it." She looked at the investors around her. "If anyone would like to discuss my services, my card has my direct number. That's the number to call." She looked at Marguerite. "The first conversation about my business happens with me." Marguerite lowered her champagne glass by a careful inch. Theron stepped forward, not in front of Cleo, beside her. "There are no authorized discussions regarding the acquisition or affiliation of Rains Financial Services." His voice was quiet. The room listened anyway. "Any representation otherwise was made without my knowledge and does not reflect my organization's position." He paused. "Miss Rains's practice is independent. That's not a temporary arrangement." A venture partner approached Cleo with a card, then 2 more. Later, when the room had reorganized around other conversations, Theron found her near the window, holding a glass of sparkling water and staring at nothing specific. "I didn't know what she was going to say," he said. "I know." A pause. "I also know I could have handled it differently." "You handled it correctly." She looked at him sideways. "You didn't have to stand there." Something shifted in his expression. "Yes, I did." She thought about that on the drive home. And the next morning. And the morning after that. Because the problem hadn't been Marguerite. Cleo had managed condescension before. The problem was everything that followed. A photo someone had taken appeared online with the caption "Aldgate Group's new financial advisor." 2 prospective clients sent messages asking if she was still independent. Her name, without any malice from anyone in the room, had been smoothly folded into the shadow of his. Theron had done everything right. That was almost what made it harder. She told him the truth on a Wednesday afternoon, after a real client had left and he was sitting across from her desk, as though he'd come about a document. "I don't know how to be near you without becoming something attached to you," she said. "In here, I'm Cleo Rains. Outside of here, I'm your bookkeeper, your discovery, a name people use to explain your decisions. I've never thought of myself that way. I know that." She looked at him. "Other people do." Theron said nothing. "I need some time," she said, "some space." He nodded once. "All right." He didn't negotiate. He didn't offer to arrange publicity, or fund her expansion, or solve the problem with money. He simply stood up and walked out, and didn't come back. The first week, the absence felt like silence after a room that had been full of sound. By the second week, Cleo noticed herself looking at the door whenever the bell above it rang. It was never him. By the third week, she had become quietly irritated by an absence she had personally requested. No manila envelopes with fabricated problems. No $19 coffee. No one sitting at the two-top near the window with the patience of someone who could, technically, make the entire street rearrange its schedule around him. Normal. She had wanted normal. Normal was apparently quite a bit louder than she remembered. Then Eli asked her to dinner, directly, clearly, with no pretense attached. He was good. He was straightforward. Being with him would be easy in a way that had nothing to do with bodyguards or photo captions or what strangers thought they were observing. Cleo thought about a man taking a seat and waiting without being asked to. She thought about $75 paid in exact change for a ledger that balanced perfectly. She thought about a lemon poppy seed muffin from across the city, and the fact that she'd mentioned it once, in passing, and he had not made a production of remembering. "I need a few days," she told Eli. He smiled. "Take them." 4 days later, the bell over the front door rang at 9 in the morning. Cleo looked up from her desk. Theron Aldgate stood in the doorway, carrying a manila envelope, and no particular expression. Her pulse did something inconvenient and immediate. She looked at the envelope. "What did you do to it?" "Nothing." "That seems unlikely." He sat down across from her, without being invited, and placed the envelope between them. Inside was a clean set of quarterly projections, 3 properties, 6 accounts, everything sourced and cross-referenced with the kind of precision that made her job take 11 minutes instead of 40. "This is perfect," she said. "I know." She looked up. Then, "Why did you bring it?" He looked, for the first time she'd ever seen, almost uncomfortable. On him, the shift was barely visible. She'd had enough practice by now to read it. "I needed a reason to come here," he said. The words sat in the space between them. Cleo looked at the man across from her, who ran 3 legitimate companies and an empire most people didn't say out loud, who had waited without complaint while she finished with other clients, who had stepped beside her at a gala and not in front of her, who had given her space the moment she asked for it, and then simply stopped and waited to see if she came back to the question on her own. "You could have just asked," she said. Theron Aldgate, who had never once required permission for anything in his professional life, had no immediate answer. Then he gave her the only honest one. "I wasn't certain you'd want me to." Not power, not confidence. The specific uncertainty of a person who knows exactly what they want and has no authority whatsoever over whether they'll receive it. Cleo looked at the perfect, unnecessary, completely fabricated quarterly report on her desk. "Consultation fee still applies," she said. Something in his face shifted quiet and relieved. "How much?" $75. "You made me go through every line." He reached for his wallet and counted out the exact amount and set it on her desk, and she thought, yes, this might actually work. 6 months later, Rain's Financial Services moved into a real office. 2 rooms, a waiting area, her name on the door in clean letters she'd chosen herself. 3 museums had reached out about archive restoration work. A regional paper ran a profile that mentioned Aldgate Group once, in the 3rd paragraph, as a former client. Theron read the article and said nothing about the 3rd paragraph. That was when she understood that he understood. They were careful with each other in the ways that mattered. She took her own car. She kept her own hours. When she attended events connected to his world, she was there professionally, introduced by her name and her work, and nothing added. One evening, he arrived at her office at closing 15 minutes before she'd finished. He sat in the client chair without being invited and waited. "Give me 10 minutes," she said. He gave her exactly 10 minutes. When she locked the door behind them and they walked out onto the sidewalk together, there was nothing remarkable in it to any passerby. No cameras. No one with a caption to write. Just Theron Aldgate, who could make an entire city hold still for him, walking quietly beside a woman who had never once held still for anyone, and who had decided, entirely on her own terms, that this was someone worth choosing. No invoice required.